Let us go ahead and set up Jupyter Lab using Docker. We can set up Jupyter Lab directly on Mac or Windows. However, setting up using Docker have its own set of advantages, especially if you are on Windows. By setting up Jupyter Lab on Docker, you will be able to interact with AWS using Linux-based environment as well, because the Docker image on which we are going to set up Jupyter Lab will be running using Linux-based operating system. You will understand as we proceed further, set up the environment and start interacting with AWS Analytics. For now, don't worry too much if you do not understand what I'm talking about. We are going to set up Jupyter Lab on top of Docker, in which case Jupyter Lab will be running on top of Linux, and then we will see how to install additional libraries to learn AWS Analytics effectively using Jupyter-based environment. Now you can go to Google and search for install Jupyter Lab using Docker. Then you can actually go to the official page. The official page is on the read the docs. It is I think jupyterlab.readthedocs.io. It will come up in a moment. For some reason it is taking a bit of time. You can see here, this is the link which you can go to, and you can see there are several options using which we should be able to set up Jupyter Lab. We can use conda or pip to set up Jupyter Lab directly on our Mac or Windows. However, we are going to set up using Docker, and hence we can scroll down and we can follow these instructions. There are several images with respect to Jupyter Lab provided by the Jupyter community itself. We should be able to use whatever is appropriate for us. For now, I'll be setting up using minimal notebook, and I'll be installing additional libraries to learn AWS Analytics at a later point in time. That being said, minimal notebook is nothing but base notebook plus some of the editors such as VI, Nano, etc. So using this image, we should be able to create and start the container by following the instructions provided here. However, these instructions are not very clear to start the containers. You might not be able to get all the features you might be looking for. And also, if you directly use this command, it will start the container as well. And if you terminate and if you start again using the same command, it will create a new container. The ideal scenario will be create the container and use the same container whenever you want. If you don't want, you can stop the container. So I'll be breaking down into two steps. First, I'll be creating the container with appropriate arguments like this, and then I'll be starting the container. And also I'll be giving a name to the container, which is nothing but AWS Analytics. Using this command as reference, I have built a new command, and the command looks like this. Let me copy paste the command which I'm going to use. So this is the command which I'm going to use to create the container. We are not going to start the container. If you see here, I'm using create, not run. -p is primarily to map the port. The Jupyter will be running on 8888 as part of the Docker, and I'm binding it to 9999 on my local machine, which means I'll be able to get it to the Jupyter Lab environment by saying localhost :9999. And also the user which is used by default is something specific to Jupyter, and we want to give sudo permissions to that user. And this is how we should be able to grant sudo permissions to the default user, which will be used as part of the Docker container. We need to add this so that we should be able to use apt to install additional libraries which might be required once we start learning stuff related to AWS Analytics. And also I'm giving name AWS Analytics so that we can use this name to interact with this container, especially to manage it. We should be able to stop, start, remove the container using this name. And this is the image name. So it will actually download the image and create the container for us, but it will not start the container. Unless we start, we will not be able to use it. So let's run this and see if the container is created. It is created. You can run docker ps-a grep. If you are using Linux, it will work. Otherwise, you can just run docker ps-a. I have so many. That's why I am piping it to grep and grepping for AWS Analytics. In your case, if you do not have too many Docker containers, just run docker ps-a and you should be able to see the details. The container is created, but it is not started. The status is created. To start the container, I can say docker start AWS Analytics. It will take care of starting the container. If you don't want this container at any point in time to be running, then you can actually say docker stop. It will take care of stopping the container. If you want to remove the container, you can say docker rm after stopping the container. And these are some of the important commands to manage the containers. So for now, we will not be removing the container or stop the container, and hence I'm just saying docker start AWS Analytics like this to start the container. Sometimes when we reboot, the containers might not be started. Then you can run docker ps-a, get the name, and you should be able to start the container like this. Now the container is started. However, to log in, we have to use this localhost :9999 because that is the port number to which I have bound this Jupyter environment running in Docker. Let me go to the browser. As part of the browser, let me say localhost :9999/lab to go to the lab. and you can see that it is asking us to enter password or token. To get the token, what you need to do is you have to run docker logs like this as part of this AWS Analytics container, and you should be able to see the details. Now we should be able to copy this and enter this here, and you should be able to get into this container. This is how you should be able to start the container and get into the Jupyter Lab and start learning using Jupyter Lab. As we have successfully set up Jupyter Lab, and also as we are able to connect to the Jupyter Lab as part of the Docker, now it is time for us to install required libraries and start interacting with AWS to manage the AWS Analytics related services as part of this course.